The son of an architect, he first trained as a cabinet maker and became a champion of modernist architecture. Ernst Plishcke was born in Austria in 1903. He arrived in New Zealand in 1939, and now, 41 years after he returned to Vienna, the City Gallery in Wellington is holding New Zealand's first retrospective of his work. The exhibition details Plishcke's development from his early years in Vienna when he studied with leading architects in Europe and North America.
The people Plishcke knew were masters in their field, so he had always that kind of dialogue with people who were at the edge, the cutting edge, the avant-garde of architecture. So from the very early beginnings in his career, he had the idea that architects are people who really change the world. This is one of the houses he had designed before he came to New Zealand. It's still known in that neighborhood as the White House. It still carries the idea of modernism so strongly that when I went to visit it, people said to me, "Oh, are you going to the White House?" And this house actually sits on a beautiful slope overlooking Lake Attersee. You know, you not just sit in a beautiful living room, but the vista is part of what the architect gave to the client.
When war broke out, Plishcke and his family came to New Zealand as refugees, and he found work with the housing department. The Labour government was pushing to improve housing standards, and Plishcke employed the same design principles as a draftsman for intensive state housing projects as he had for expansive European homes.
I think he felt a very strong social impact in terms of town planning.
After years of frustration at his designs being altered, Plishcke left government service in 1947. Unrecognised by the New Zealand Institute of Architects, he went into private practice, where his new clients were New Zealanders who were unafraid to embrace modernist design ideas. In 1953, Plishcke was employed by the Such-Smith family to design this house in Brooklyn. 2.5 years ago, Helen Such and her husband Keith Ovenden teamed up with architect Alistair Luke to begin restoration.
It was my childhood home and I loved it. And then of course was also the element that it was an important part of New Zealand's architectural history, which I had no notion of when I was a child. It was just, you know, where I lived, but it was a wonderful place to live. And then later on, of course, I realised that this was special and that Ernst Plishcke himself thought it was probably his best work in New Zealand. The other element in all of this was that it was really as a tribute to my father and mother and their vision way back in the early 50s.
Architect Alistair Luke says the details are remarkable. The floor-to-ceiling glass, recessed curtain railings and lack of architraves.
And I suppose the other really big feature of it is, which was part of Plishcke's manifesto, was the extraordinary amount of built-in furniture. His idea was that you got rid of the clutter of bought tables and chairs and wardrobes, etc., and everything was built in. And in this house, he took that to the nth degree.
But for all his modernism, Plishcke had some old-fashioned ideas about what a professional woman would want in her study.
This was actually a fold-down ironing board with the hinge at the bottom. My mother didn't feel the same need for an iron in her study, so she actually had it converted, all the hinges changed, and it's just a little cupboard now.
Plishcke was also very particular about colour. In all his houses, he used the same restricted palette. During restoration, Helen and Alistair went to great lengths to recreate the original colours.
There are various mixes now called Plishcke blue and Brooklyn blue and, you know, Such blue, and as we went through a whole series until we felt we'd got the blue.
After 24 years in New Zealand, Plishcke returned to Vienna, embittered by the lack of recognition his work had received in this country. Now, however, his contribution to the development of modernist architecture in New Zealand is acknowledged as unrivalled.
If you look upon his work, about 24 years in New Zealand, it is an incredible work. More than 40 housing projects, the famous Massey House, churches. It's incredible what he did in these 24 years here in New Zealand.